Welcome to day 43 or 44. What day are we on here? I think we might be on day
44 maybe.
44. I'm Roy, and I'm here with my teammate Min. And what we do here is we share one question every day about work that you might be facing and what we've learned about it as startup investors. This is not advice. And today we're doing it a little earlier because later on our firm, together with Stanford, is hosting a learning event called First Principles for people in tech who want to learn how to give philanthropically and politically once they've been successful in tech, figuring out how to have a positive impact on the world. So with that.
Totally. And so today's question is an interesting one. How do I handle a customer who's being abusive towards me?
Yeah, we heard this one from a founder in whom we invested, and it's such a typical question. I faced it as a CEO, even as an investor, where we think of our founders as customers. It happens rarely, but it can happen. And the thing I'd say for people is if you're encountering this, it's a common thing. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong, and it's probably only going to get worse over the course of your career. I remember when I was running an online media company, this chief marketing officer of one of our biggest advertisers, a huge global corporation, calling me and screaming at me and saying like they would threaten to pull all of our ads unless we changed some piece of content on our site. And that was kind of just the beginning. And so where it starts for me is, as so often, taking care of yourself, like making sure you're responding from a place where you're centered, where your emotions are regulated, whatever you need to do in that moment. Take a breath. This week, we were theming our responses around remote work. Sometimes actually remotely, it can be easier because you can hit the mute button. The conversation may be asynchronous. It's not the same as somebody in person. I'll also say that, I can only give my perspective here. And as a white man, there are certain kinds of abuse that others have probably been at, that others have been at the receiving end of that I just don't know. So what I'll say is for the kinds of abuse that I've seen, awful, flagrant things, and even gentle, not quite rights can often be handled in similar, not the same ways. And I'll just note that often it starts with little things with the person, because it's often the people. Somebody said to me, why is it that this person I've been so good to is the one treating me wrong? And it's actually often those people for whom you do the most who end up the most disappointed, because they're the askiest, they're the most demanding. And so the first thing I try to do is just say, well, what is the boundary that this person is crossing? And a useful tool for thinking about that is if this person treated somebody else, not yourself, maybe it's a teammate, maybe it's another customer, maybe it's somebody else in the community that way, what line would you say they were crossing? And sometimes that line is known to them. Sometimes it's just a basic standard of human behavior. We saw AOC, on the House floor. The House doesn't need a rule against what, that other congressman called her. But the reason it's helpful to imagine what they know is because you want to anticipate their response when you raise it with them. And then your job is to describe the boundary and a consequence and act on the consequence. And that sounds simple. It's hard to do. When you're doing it remotely, I'd say there's two other aspects of it. Even more clarity on the boundary. I refuse to participate in conversations where a customer of ours tells us that, calls us names, something like that. And if you do that, I'm just going to disengage from this conversation. Frequently, that's a really good consequence to have. People often go all the way of like, should I reject them as a customer? Give them some more modest consequence first, but there has to be a consequence. Like if there's no consequence to crossing a boundary, then it's just talk. The second thing I'd say when you do it remotely is it's really important to do it compassionately, because chances are, not in every case, but chances are that person is not a bad person. They may be having a bad day. They may be making a mistake. They may have a different worldview. But if you can try to be compassionate toward them, your chance of getting what you want just goes up. And then, once that's handled, and the consequence should be the way that you handle it, then you often think, okay, well, what have I learned from this and how do I expand from there? So for example, if the boundary was unsaid and you think it should be said, maybe you update your community terms and conditions or something like that so you can point back to it. So that's kind of the full cycle of how you imagine it, how you act on it, and how you learn from there and feed back to the cycle, always remembering to take care of yourself. Min, I'm sure that you've had lots of first-hand experiences with all kinds of bad behavior in the world. What do you feel is missing from that answer?
I mean, I think especially with a customer relationship, you might be the primary point of contact, but you often have a team too. And so getting a second opinion often might help. And so if that is something available and there's a way to do that in an appropriate way, whether it is just to get a second opinion or if it's for you to kind of extricate yourself out of like what might be a really heady conflict and having somebody else step in to be a mediator, that's also an option. Obviously, for everyone listening, you'll know the full context, but I think that is something else you can also think about.
Yeah, Min, you're so good about bringing in other sources of support. I love that. I'll also say something implied here is I didn't really say the relevance of them being a customer. It could be hard because maybe they pay you. And the reason I didn't say it is I'm not sure it's that relevant. A customer, a teammate, a vendor, whatever, if somebody crosses a boundary, and the boundary may be different if somebody's a customer versus a vendor, probably not in terms of abuse, but it doesn't matter who they are. And your dignity is one of these things that only you can set the price for that. And once you've set the price and the boundary, nobody can cross it. So I'm going to be out for 2 weeks.
Sage life wisdom.
August 10th. What's that, Min?
Sage life wisdom.
Oh yeah, maybe. Or just the scar tissue of pain shown. Back in a couple of weeks because I'm taking off and spending time with my family.
Yeah. Well, so thanks for listening to today's This Is Not Advice. Normally we're here every weekday, but we'll be back, like Roy said, on August 10th. So in the meantime, if you have other questions about work, share them with us on Twitter.
Thanks, Min.
Thank you.